Liberals believe that I'm making up a lot of stuff as I do the program for two reasons. Number one, they ignore all of the sources I cite because somehow they feel that benefits them. Or number two, they don't actually hear the show. They hear somebody complaining about the show, and then they figure, well, they're the smartest person in any room. The rest of us are just, making it up and winging it as we go along and shouting and screaming. I bring this up. I'll get to something in a moment, which is going to tell you that maybe perhaps I've done a little research on what I talk about. 9:34. It's 56. Bill Cawley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We had a wonderful visit with Dr. Jonathan Tripp yesterday. He's been all over media this week because of some efforts he and a medical colleague made to revive someone at Gold's Gym earlier in the week. Next Wednesday morning, we'll be joined again by one of the medical professionals from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls, Idaho. We do it every Wednesday morning, and it's your opportunity as well. If you've got a medical issue and you need to talk to somebody and get some guidance, this is the opportunity to do it. Wednesdays between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Dr. Tripp's office is still looking for new patients. Often, they can see you on the very same day if you call in the morning and you've got a medical issue. And remember, the office is located on Fillmore Street in Twin Falls, directly across from the main post office, and life's too short not to feel good. I talked a little earlier about medical insurance and the costs associated with medical insurance. The fact of the matter is, all of these young people out there who are looking to pay coverage, if you've got already and by the way, Sean Spicer said yesterday, and as it turns out, the White House apparently isn't communicating very well with Republicans on Capitol Hill, that pre-existing conditions would be covered in these changes. And that's not true. Now, that's going to make a lot of people upset because they're going to say, yeah, but I have cancer. How can I get insurance? And I brought up earlier that the insurance companies, these are private entities. And it's like going into the bakery. If you're hungry, the bakery may, out of kindness, give you a loaf of bread, but they're not going to feed you every day because if they got into the habit of feeding every hungry person, eventually the bakery goes out of business. And the baker has to make a living too. So the argument from the left is, well, this is why we need single payer. That is, a nationalized health system where we just tax everybody through the nose and then we give everybody everything they want when it comes to health care. This is from the New York Times, the Bible of American Liberalism, July 18th, 2005. Clifford J. Levy and Michael Luo, and I've been holding on to this. It's a clipping that I've been saving for years. It's been in a desk drawer. I raced out during the break and I picked it up. Headline, New York Medicaid fraud may reach into billions. The writer says it was created 40 years ago to provide health care for the poorest New Yorkers, offering a lifeline to those who could not afford to have a baby or a heart attack. But in the decades since, New York State's Medicaid program has also become a $44.5 billion target for the unscrupulous and the opportunistic. It has drawn dentists like Dr. Dolly Rosen, who within 12 months somehow built the state's biggest Medicaid dental practice out of a Brooklyn storefront, where she claimed to have performed as many as 991 procedures a day in 2003. After the New York Times discovered her extraordinary billings through a computer analysis and questioned the state about them, Dr. Rosen and two associates were indicted on charges of stealing more than $1 million from the program. Again, they claimed they were seeing nearly 1,000 patients a day. This went on for a very long time until somebody in an office somewhere said, gee, that can't be happening. How can you see that many patients in a day? 8 hours and, you still got a lunch break and a couple of coffee breaks. How can you see 1,000 patients? We better check into that. How often do you think this is going on around the country? And if you had a single-payer healthcare system, how much of this would go on? How much of it would never be detected? What would it cost us? That's my point. That's what I bring up when I'm talking about this. Liberals out there say, yes, but it would be good for everybody. Yeah, until it bankrupted the country, and then what? It has drawn, the writer says, van services intended as medical transportation for patients who cannot walk unaided that pick up scores of people who walk quite easily when a reporter was watching nearby. In cooperation with medical offices that order these services, The ambulettes typically cost the taxpayers more than $50 a round trip, adding up to $200 million a year. In some cases, the rides that the state paid for may never have taken place. School officials around the state have enrolled tens of thousands of low income students in speech therapy without the required evaluation, garnering more than $1 billion in questionable Medicaid payments for their districts. One Buffalo school official sent 4,434 students into speech therapy in a single day without talking to them or reviewing their records, according to federal investigators. I'm on page 2 of the story now. It's 19 pages long with these details. Nursing home operators have received substantial salaries and profits from Medicaid payments while keeping staffing levels below the national average. One operator took in $1.5 million in salary and profit in the same year. He was fined for neglecting the home's residents. Do you think that perhaps when we talk about a single payer or nationalized healthcare system, that this type of stuff is going to go away? No, Bill, we'll hire an army of investigators to spy on the American people, you see, and then we'll pay them 3 shifts a day, 24 hours a day plus weekends, and that national army will only cost us, oh, I don't know, $1 trillion a year. That'll take care of it. Liberals are the neighborhood fools. Remember that. 20 minutes away from 10 o'clock. It's 59. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. I just looked up at the monitor here in the room, and President Trump is speaking in the Rose Garden. He and Vice President Mike Pence. And it's part of the events for the National Day of Prayer today. There are events going on right here in Twin Falls. I've been trying to get those people in the last few years in advance to get them on the air so that we could help them out a little bit with a little radio promotion, and nobody ever seems interested in doing it. President Trump is wearing a tie this morning that's identical to a tie I own. In design. In design, I say, because I used to buy most of my ties for $3 to $7 at Marshall's, and I'm sure President Trump's ties come from somewhere a bit more well-appointed. 944, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 60. And the weather is going to be, 80 degrees or better today. Cool off a little bit over the next few days, but realistically, we're done with the cold weather. And we're going to be in some really, really nice weather, dry and sunny for the next several days. A few clouds here and there, but it won't upset you. And just a quick note, the weather is a service of Mountain Home Auto Ranch in Mountain Home. I like to call it the candy store for adults, especially men with all of the array of pickup trucks. As you're driving up the highway and you look over, really difficult sometimes to keep your eyes on the road, but you got to do it. I was talking a little bit about the vote today on the so-called Obamacare repeal, which is really just, it's Obamacare light. Let's be honest about that. There are some positives in it. As Raul Labrador said yesterday, it's a compromise, and it's a start to hopefully repealing all of the other onerous aspects of it down the road. Moderate Republicans, as they're called, had to actually work with Labrador's group, the Freedom Caucus, to get this passed, because the Freedom Caucus rejected the previous plan. So this time around, they made some decisions, and the Freedom Caucus said, we'll take that for now, but with the goal that we're going to revisit all of this. Yesterday, Labrador was a no vote. He had talked to us in the morning about all of this. He was a no vote on the budget resolution that keeps the government open and avoids the shutdown for another 6 months. And this revision, or this budget resolution, will cost us more than $1 trillion. You keep thinking about all of this, and the fact that so many people in Washington, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, and really probably government everywhere, can't say no, despite the fact it's like sailing down a river and knowing that there's a waterfall up ahead and that your raft is going to go tumbling over it. And you just keep saying, well, don't worry about it. Maybe when we get down near the ledge, there'll be a rope and we'll grab that and hang from the rope. And how long will you hang there? Well, until somebody comes along and rescues us. What if they don't come along and rescue you? Oh, come now, don't be so silly. When I talk to a lot of politicians, and I don't talk to maybe nearly as many as I used to, the difference between doing an opinion talk show and actually being a reporter is somewhat of a wide chasm itself. When I talk to politicians, and even the ones who tell you that spending is bad and that budgets are out of control, and yet they'll turn around and they'll vote for same old, same old. You always get an explanation. It would be like going up to your congressman and saying, you know what, congressman, I wish you'd voted for the gangrene bill because gangrene's bad stuff. And your congressman looks at you and says, oh, come on now, Bill. What do you have against gangrene? After all, gangrene can be a good thing, really, when you think about it for a moment. After all, think about those poor bacteria that are eating away. They have to eat as well, you know. Bacteria, Bill, are God's creatures. They're a creation of God, a living thing. God loves all living things, Bill. What do you have against living things? Bill, I understand that you're pro-life. Why would you like to abort the bacteria that cause gangrene? They'll give you some ridiculous answer, and that's akin to what they do when you talk about government spending. Even the guys who claim, and usually they're the loudest when they proclaim that I'm a conservative. You elect me and I'll go to Washington or to Boise and I'll give them the what for. Except when they get there, they do the same thing that everybody else does. And debt is a little bit like gangrene. It's eating away at the country. And they keep giving you these excuses, and then they throw these questions at you like, oh, are you against living things, Bill? Oh. I'm sorry, but I've had enough of that baloney over the years. And they think people actually buy that excuse when they give something out like that. 948. Telephone number for reaching our program today, 736-0300, 736-0300. You're listening to News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Caller, you're on the air.
Good morning. It's interesting, all of these people that are elected, almost at every level of government, take an oath to uphold the U.S. Constitution. And that, it limits what government, Article 1, Section 8 is specifically on what the federal government be involved in. And also Article 4, Section 4 tells us our elected people to protect us from invasion. And we're being invaded with these Muslim refugees and immigrants and so forth. But we need to hold their feet to the fire that they take this oath and remind them that they take this oath every time you talk to them, and just let them know that in those uncertain terms that they're violating their oath of office by voting for these budget deals or continuing to, I think the budget includes more immigrant money coming in here. So, we're going to ruin our country financially and culturally if we don't hold these politicians' feet to the fire.
I'm reminded of a story. I know that you're a member of a particular political organization that is behind a rather well-written magazine called The New American Statesman. And you have a counterpart at the state level who quietly is the coordinator at the state level. And I was having lunch with him a few months ago, and he shared the story with me. He lives in Canyon County, and he shared the story with me. He was having an argument with one of the Republican leaders in his central committee. And the guy is a lawyer. And the guy said, your problem is you and all the other constitutionalists out there think we should be following that document all the time. And your counterpart at the state level in your organization said to him, well, you're a lawyer. Do you follow the Constitution in court? And the guy was left speechless. How much longer do we have to deal with these turncoats?
Absolutely. They're so hypocritical. They take that oath and they say, look at me. I'm sending me back, like you said, back to Washington. I'm going to clean up this mess, vote for constitutional issues. They just throw the Constitution in the garbage can and just do whatever the political hacks and their rhino Republicans and neocons and so forth want them to do. The establishment is just not going to allow the change to happen, and this is why all of the resistance against Trump, but not only the Democrats, the media, of course, but so many in the party. There's about 50 in the party that should change their R to a D, at least in the way they vote. So, it's just really important that every time we're talking, and a lot of people, the other thing I see, a lot of people put up a good talk. They say, well, we need to do this as individual citizens, but we don't take enough individual responsibility to send the emails, write the letters to the editor, get on the phone to their offices, and tell them how it really is and to demand that they uphold the Constitution.
Yeah. I thank you for the call. I don't know how many people I've talked to who they'll complain about government in the first place, and then they'll tell you that they didn't bother to vote. Well, my vote doesn't count. I don't know. It was a pretty razor thin election this past November on the national level. Your vote just may count more than you think it does. And the more and more split the country becomes down the middle, indeed, the more important your vote becomes. 952, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. We're at 60 this morning. I I have to tell you, I try to remain optimistic, but it is really difficult to remain optimistic in this country about the future just because of the volume of debt and because even Republicans keep kicking the can down the road. You're up next and you're on the air.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. I agree with you. Of course, I think we need the list of names of all of these turncoat Republicans, the 50 of them or whatever they are, that's not voting our way, so that come election time, everybody can remember their name and do what they feel is right. Get rid of them. I think we'll be better off. Thank you for all you do, Bill.
Thanks much for the telephone call. 952 now. Our previous caller is often a caller that I get a chance to talk to about energy issues. And before I wrap up the program today, I have a couple of things I wanted to share with you that so much ends up on the floor after the show that we never get to. I've got to be doing this. I should be doing this 3 or 4 hours, I guess. I don't have a problem with working a little more on the air. To me, there's so much that we've got to talk about we never get the chance to do. But our previous caller to the last one has some background in the energy industry. And while he was talking with me, I got thinking about something in my clip file here. This comes from today's edition of the Washington Examiner. Mark J. Perry is a contributing writer, and he works in the energy industry. Today's most productive energy workers are in coal and gas, not solar. And I was just stopped 2 weeks ago as I was coming back from Boise one weekend, and I went up to Boise and grabbed some lunch and did a little sightseeing around the area. And I was driving back, and I decided to stop at the new solar farm, which, if you're coming south, it's not too far away from the Boise stage stop. I got off the highway and I drove down, and of course, the thing is under surveillance. So I guess they were taking my picture while I got out of the car and took some pictures of all of the solar panels that are sitting out there. Now, I'm not opposed to solar panels. They'll get better. Technology moves along at a rapid clip today, and the day, yes, may well come where solar panels are a quite valuable thing to have, and you won't need so much because this solar farm is enormous. And right now, if we wanted to rely on solar to fuel this country, and yes, you have politicians who are willing to spend a lot of money on a technology that at the moment is like feeding a dead horse because it's not a live horse yet. It isn't, with technology hasn't reached that point yet where we can do it efficiently to power the whole country. And it may never get there. Even the fellow, Cheo, the last name slips my mind, but he's the Asian-looking scientist. He's all over television. Says in the future we've got to use everything available for energy. So he's not against coal and oil and natural gas and nuclear. He's also for solar and wind, whatever you need to do to derive energy to keep the economy going. And I tend to agree with that. But I looked at that vast solar farm and it struck me, as big as it is, how little energy it probably generates. And I have this from this Mark J. Perry writing at Washington Examiner. The New York Times did a story talking about how wonderful it was that the solar energy industry in this country is employing pretty close to 500,000 people now. The writer says, simply reporting rather enthusiastically as the Times did that the solar industry employs lots of Americans, more than twice as many as the number of coal miners and utility workers at electric power plants using coal, is only telling a small part of the story. Despite a huge workforce of almost 400,000 solar workers, about 20% of electric power payrolls in 2016, that sector produced an insignificant share, less than 1% of the electric power generated in the United States last year. And that's a lot of solar workers, about the same as the combined number of workers at ExxonMobil, Chevron, Apple, Johnson & Johnson, Microsoft, Pfizer, Ford Motor Company, and Procter & Gamble. And then I got to this paragraph. In contrast, it took about the same number of natural gas workers, just under 400,000 last year, to produce more than one-third of U.S. electric power, or 37 times more electricity than solar's minuscule share of 0.9%. And with only 160,000 coal workers, less than half the number of workers in either solar or gas, that sector produced nearly one-third, almost as much as gas, of U.S. electricity last year. And yet, once again, you have people out there that keep saying, well, if we don't do this, then the earth will fry to a crisp. So we need to keep building all of these. They reward lots of liberal friends out there by building all of these solar arrays and the windmills and coming up with all of these highfalutin ideas telling us it's going to save the planet. And then the people who build all of those things and get subsidized to do it turn around and a kickback give some of those subsidies, some of the money back to the politicians who promote all of this in the first place. And our deficits go higher and our debt goes higher, deficit being the yearly count, the debt being the overall count. And then they come back and tell us, if you don't do this, the seas are going to rise and drown us all. Well, you're going to starve us all because of all of the debt before that happens. Rush Limbaugh will be coming along in just a few minutes on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. He'll follow the news at 10 o'clock from Fox. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, and God willing, if the creek don't rise, they'll allow me to come back and do this all over again tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. We also expect to be joined in studio by Todd Eccles from Patriot Defense. We'll talk firearms and firearm safety tomorrow here on the radio. Following the news at 1 o'clock today, it's Sean Hannity's program. Glenn Beck following 4 o'clock news. Dave Ramsey tonight from 7 until 10 o'clock. Try and have a good day, folks.